One issue comes up over and over again in drawing architecture, and that's brickwork. Bricks have their own special challenge. Personally, I'm a fan of bricks, and I love the way they look en masse. And I love brick walls where patterns are picked out in 3 dimensions through the ways the bricks have been laid, or in 2 dimensions where bricks of different colours have been used. But the problem in drawing architecture that involves bricks is there's just so many of them. And depending on the size of the bricks and the size of the building and how close we are, there can be an awfully huge number of bricks to draw. And when I look at drawings, sometimes the brickwork is the weak link in the drawing. So I have a drawing of this building ready to receive its bricks. And I want to firstly draw the bricks as I often see them and point out the problems I think we have with that. So I'll just draw this quickly now. And this is how our brickwork often finishes up. Now I've drawn the problems with it in a way to make the problems very clear. And it may be that with your brickwork, some of these are issues that your line work has, though possibly not to the degree I've put them into this drawing now. The first problem with brickwork is that it's in horizontal rows. And anything that's horizontal in a building is going to have to follow the perspective angles of the building. So all of the horizontal rows of bricks between here and here have to fit into these perspective angles. They have to evenly fan between the 2 lines. And of course, they don't. We start off with the lines appearing to fan, but they sort of become a bit straighter for a while. And then we have more distance to make up on the right-hand end than the left-hand end pretty quickly. And so the rows of bricks fan out too much. Now, of course, the same should be true on the other side of the building. But we have a further complication here in that the rows of bricks are interrupted by this bay window that comes out. And what we find is that the 11 rows on the left-hand side becomes 10 rows on the right-hand side. The other problem we have with bricks is that as well as following the perspective angles on the horizontal, on the vertical, they need to follow the perspective rules of foreshortening. And if you're not familiar with foreshortening, please have a look at some of my videos that I've produced on that. But foreshortening says that as things move further away from the viewer, they become more and more compressed. And this becomes more relevant with things on the side of a building moving away from us that are the same width, such as windows or spaces between windows or spaces between columns. Those objects and those spaces look narrower and narrower as they move further down the wall, further away from us. But bricks are also a regularly sized architectural element. Therefore, as the bricks move further away from us, they need to become narrower and narrower and narrower. But they also need to keep the same proportion of their shape. We can get our foreshortening correct of our bricks, but in the process we change our bricks from being horizontal rectangles to being vertical rectangles. So keeping our proportions of our bricks accurate as we move from the closer parts of the wall to the further parts of the wall can be quite a challenge. The other problem I see is that just as our horizontal lines can waver in all sorts of directions, so can our vertical lines. And what I often see are these little horizontal lines to mark the joins between 2 bricks in a row start to slope, sometimes to quite a strong degree. And I've realized recently, as I've tried to draw a few examples of brickwork not done as carefully as it could be done, I've come to realize it's probably been because as we move our pen further along to draw more of these lines, if we don't actually move our whole hand along quickly enough, then we'll start to cramp our holding position, having to pull the pen closer. And the natural result of that is that the line starts to slope. Because we can pull it further to the right, the further down the page it goes. So we have problems with the horizontal lines. We have problems with the vertical lines. We also have problems with scale. Even if all of these bricks had their lines pretty much in the right perspectives, horizontally and vertically, they're still too big. They don't actually look like normal sized bricks on this relatively small structure. If we look at the brickwork here, we can see that the bricks really are quite small. In fact, we have 21 rows of bricks in this section instead of the 11, or it's really more 10.5 that we have here. So we actually need twice as many rows of bricks as we've drawn. And the other problem with drawing the bricks in this way is when we look at the bricks, because we've drawn them with black line, the bricks are visually the dominant feature of our little house. What we can mostly see are bricks. Bricks with a roof and a window at the front. Whereas when we look at our scene, we discern the bricks second to discerning the major architectural elements. We see the walls as walls before we see them as a pattern of bricks. And so the whole visual impact of our scene is hijacked by our line work for the bricks. So what's a better way to draw bricks? Particularly when we don't want to spend 3 hours of our day drawing every brick for a small building. Let me do this line work again and do it the way I would do it if I were drawing this as a quick sketch and wanted to give some indication of brickwork. So how do I draw the brickwork, particularly when I'm drawing directly in ink? Firstly, I'm aware of these issues that we've talked about when we looked at this method of drawing the brickwork. Whatever I do, I want to make sure my perspective angles fit the pattern for the perspective of this particular view position. I want to make sure that not just my horizontal lines fit the right perspective, but also my vertical lines with the foreshortening. And I want to draw my bricks so that they look the correct scale. But what I don't want to have to do is to draw every brick. Not very interesting and easy to get wrong, but also because, again, I want to avoid the effect where the bricks are the first and the main thing we see. So if I'm not going to draw all of the bricks, then what I'm going to want to be doing is to create a brick effect, to capture the effect of the bricks, the feel of the bricks, without capturing the exact, accurate depiction of all the bricks. It's the same way as when I draw a tree. I'm not trying to draw every leaf, I'm trying to capture the effect of the leaves. Or with the branches, I'm not trying to draw the exactness of every branch branching out and connecting with other branches, but I'm trying to connect the effect of the branches, how they look at a glance rather than through a careful study. So it's the equivalent of this technique that I want to apply now to my brickwork. And although I do see bricks drawn in this way, I prefer to think of the horizontal and the vertical lines separately and to draw them separately. Now, if I'm not going to draw the brickwork completely, if I'm going to have places where I don't draw it, the question is, where am I going to draw it? That's now a choice I need to make. And basically, I like to choose where I draw it for two main ways. One is, where will it be easier to draw it? So for instance, it's easier to draw it here or here than here, because I don't have as far to take my horizontal lines. And I can draw the complete pattern of bricks more easily here than in the middle of here. But the other thing I like to do is I like to get some sense of scale by drawing some of the closer bricks in more detail and some of the furthest away bricks in more detail as well. Because that gives the brain the information it needs to, in effect, see the whole wall accurately. It can look at this part and it can look at this part and it can join the bits in between that we haven't drawn. The other thing I do is I actually have a look to see how large the bricks are. So I see that there are 3 courses of bricks here. that gives me an idea of how large I need to make them. And these bricks that are here are the closest bricks I'm seeing straight on. And there's about just over 2 bricks worth here. I'm actually going to draw these ones. And it can be helpful to do little dots to tell ourselves where we want to do the rows. Now, I do these with a very light touch, and I would often actually switch to a smaller pen. I've drawn this with a 0.5. I would often switch to a 0.3, but I want to show the effect using the same pen, because often we just have one pen with us. Now, I've been happy enough to draw most of the brick lines in this section because it's not very large. So this is giving me a sense of the size of the bricks and the courses close. So I know that from here to here, I'm going to have... I didn't put these lines quite in the right place, but that's okay because they don't actually have to join up with what's over here. So we're looking at something like this. We're trying to suggest the rows at each end without having to have the accuracy demanded by joining everything up. Now, I'm actually not going to draw the lines here at this further point because I want to create some separation of line work just so that this stands out a bit more. So I'll leave this for a bit and I'm going to go to the top. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm being selective with which bricks I actually draw. And because I've sort of gone top and bottom here, I think here I'm going to aim for a few sort of filling in something of this gap. But we do want to keep the effect reasonably random. Now the other thing I want to do with this line is that it follows the whole perspective line. So I'm going to actually get a sense of the line from over here. And I think that's as much as I want to do for this lower section of this part. Oh, actually, no, I might do want to just show that there's bricks above this notice board. Now, over here, our lines get significantly closer together. And again, I think I'll actually do some in this top corner because I don't have any here. And that's enough of that. Now we come to our main wall, and the principles are the same. I want to do a patchy representation of our brickwork, but I want to keep the perspective lines correct. I want to join some of it at least with this and create a balance in what I do and don't do. And of course, I do wish I'd have been a little more careful with where I started my lines here. Because I draw lines most accurately from left to right, it's a bit tricky because I have to draw them from further along and finish them here. And that's probably enough for this wall here. And as I suspected, I'm actually 2 rows short. I've got 20 rows that I've spaced. Now I need to put some rows of bricks up here where we actually have a pattern of indentations in the brickwork. So this is how I would render a brick wall, trying to create the effect of the wall rather than the exactness of it. So I've added a bit of hatching in to give more of an overall sense of the structure, which I think is always what we want. My aim with brickwork is always to suggest the effect of the brickwork rather than trying to do the really extremely challenging and a little bit tedious job of trying to draw in all the bricks. A little bit different if we're painting, working with colour and so forth, because then we can paint the bricks a darker colour and we can use a white pen to draw in the rows and the spaces between them. But if we're working black on white in ink, this can very often end up being the effect when we tackle the brickwork. And usually we don't want the brickwork to overpower the overall look of our building. So a somewhat lighter touch and a focus on suggesting the brickwork, trying to make that brickwork we do as accurate as possible, obeying all the perspective we need to obey for this viewpoint, can sometimes give us a better result. Whatever effect you're trying to achieve with your bricks and however you draw them, make sure you have fun. I'm Stephen Travers. I'll see you next time. Bye.